US President Donald Trump's refused to certify Iran's compliance with its 2015 nuclear deal with the international community. While not ripping up the treaty altogether, it deals it a severe blow. Trump's also reserved the personal right to scrap the deal if Congress and America's allies do not agree to his new policies.
We will not continue down a path whose predictable conclusion is more violence, more terror, and the very real threat of Iran's nuclear breakout. That is why I am directing my administration to work closely with Congress and our allies to address the deal's many serious flaws so that the Iranian regime can never threaten the world with nuclear weapons. As we have seen in North Korea, the longer we ignore a threat, the worse that threat becomes.
The policy changes include new sanctions, particularly against Iran's Revolutionary Guard, and seeks to include Iran's ballistic missile program for the first time.
China holds a consistent stance on the Iran nuclear deal issue. We believe this deal is important to ensuring the international nuclear non-proliferation regime and regional peace and stability. We hope all parties can continue to preserve and implement this deal.
حقوق بین الملل رو هم ظاهراً دقیق نخواندند. چطور نسبت به یک معاهده‌ای که معاهده چند جانبه است و به یک معنا چون در سازمان ملل متحد و طبق قطعنامه تأیید شده یک سند سازمان مللی است، مگر یک رئیس جمهور میتونه این سند را به تنهایی لغو کنه و الغا کنه؟ او ظاهراً نمیدانه که این یک سند دو جانبه بین ایران و آمریکا نیست که هر گونه خواست رفتار بکنه. زمانی که حقوق ما تأمین می شود، تا زمانی که منافع ما اقتضا می کند، تا زمانی که ما از منافع برجام برخوردار هستیم، در چارچوب منافع ملی و مصالح ملی به برجام.
Good evening. Thanks for being here for this. More than 2 years ago, exactly in July 2015, the entire international community welcomed the result of 12 years of intense negotiations on the Iranian nuclear program. 104 pages full of technical details. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it. It is a multilateral agreement which was unanimously endorsed by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. It is a robust deal that provides guarantees and a strong monitoring mechanism so that Iran's nuclear program is and will remain exclusively for civilian purposes only. We cannot afford, as international community, as Europe for sure, to dismantle a nuclear agreement that is working and delivering, especially now. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has verified 8 times that Iran is implementing all its nuclear-related commitments, following a comprehensive and strict monitoring system. There have been no violations of any of the commitments included in the agreement. The scope of the agreement relates to the nuclear program and is being fulfilled. The deal has prevented and continues to prevent, will continue to prevent, Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action represents a key and functioning pillar of the international non-proliferation architecture that is even more important to preserve at a time of acute nuclear threat. We believe we have a collective responsibility to preserve it for our own collective security. The United States domestic process, and I underline domestic, following today's announcement of President Trump, is now in the hands of the United States Congress. The JCPOA is not a domestic issue, but a UN Security Council resolution. The international community and the European Union with it has clearly indicated that the deal is and will continue to be in place. The European Union continues to fully support the Iran nuclear deal and the full and strict implementation of all its provisions by all parties. The European Union, together with the rest of the international community, is committed to preserve it to the benefit of all, including the Iranian people.
Thank you very much. We will stop there and see you on Monday. Thank you.
مسئله دوم موضوع رفتارهای آمریکا در صحنه بین‌المللی.
Следующий вопрос я хотел бы обратить ваше внимание, это поведение Соединенных Штатов на международной арене.
به نظر میرسه که یک حرکتی را آغاز کردن که منجر به هم ریختگی بزرگتر در صحنه بین‌المللی خواهد شد.
Кажется, что они начали некоторые движения, которые в конечном счете приведет к неупорядоченности в международной арене.
نمونه اون در تحریم‌های ایران و روسیه هست که انجام شد.
И свидетельством того являются те санкции, которые они ввели против Ирана и против России.
و همچنین مواضعی که اخیراً در مورد توافق هسته‌ای داره میگیره.
А также те меры, которые они недавно начали предпринимать по поводу ядерной договоренности с Ираном.
در چند ماه اخیر مکرراً آمریکایی‌ها توافق هسته‌ای رو نقض کردند.
И за последние месяцы американцы неоднократно нарушали ядерные договоренности.
ما از مواضع روسیه و آقای لاوروف که در اجلاس 5+1 که نیویورک شرکت کردن تشکر می‌کنم.
Госсекретарь США Тиллерсон на этих переговорах, я, честно говоря, удивлялся.
Мы будем всемерно поддерживать.
The Security Council went about its daily business, discussing Myanmar in a closed session, but the abrasive speech by President Trump certainly resonated in this building.
Please raise the
Iran deal was codified in a Security Council resolution back in 2015, at a time the US and the UN had different leaders.
What has been agreed by the United States and European Union, also Germany, with Iran must be fully implemented. It is a very important deal. I'm sorry to see what is now happening.
Diplomats of today are sorry too.
We are concerned by some of the implications of this statement because we stand by the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We judge it to be a good deal which helps improve international security, and we want to see it continue to remain in force.
Others argue the US cannot unilaterally amend a Security Council resolution.
It is not a bilateral agreement. It does not belong to any single country, and it is not up to any single country to terminate it. It is a multilateral agreement which was unanimously endorsed by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231.
And the leaders in Germany, France and the United Kingdom added their concern for the deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. They say, preserving the JCPOA is in our shared national security interest. The nuclear deal was a culmination of 13 years of diplomacy and was a major step towards ensuring that Iran's nuclear program is not diverted for military purposes. The leaders added that they were worried and willing to act over Iran's ballistic missile program and what they described as its regional activities. Iran has sent a formal letter of protest to the UN Secretary General. It says, "The Islamic Republic of Iran will not be the first to withdraw from the deal, but if its rights and interests in the deal are not respected, it will stop implementing all its commitments and will resume its peaceful nuclear program without any restrictions." The greatest concern, that Iran itself withdraws from the deal, shifting what was an internationally monitored and restrained nuclear process back into the darkness.
Has committed multiple violations of the agreement. For example, on 2 separate occasions, they have exceeded the limit of 130 metric tons of heavy water. Until recently, the Iranian regime has also failed to meet our expectations in its operation of advanced centrifuges.
Professor, what do you make of that?
The accusations, like so much of what President Trump says, are false to begin with, but also constitute the same kind of rationale that he tends to use for outrageous actions that he wants to take, which is to fabricate a set of alternate facts that would appear to justify his actions. In this case, they don't even appear to justify his actions, but these accusations have been denied already before he made them by virtually the entire world community, which has been carefully monitoring the agreement and says that Iran is completely in charge of it. Now, I think the real underlying thing is that he's looking for a pretext to begin a process of ramping up a threat of an attack on Iran, which was the original aim of the United States starting in the 1990s, but certainly after the designation of Iran as one of the 3 rogue regimes that the U.S. was targeting, and that the Obama administration had slightly backed off from in the force of this agreement. So I think what we really must take from this is understanding that he wants to start marching the road back to threats and perhaps the possibility of the long-desired attack on Iraq, an attempt of regime change. But I also think that we should not take anything that Trump says too seriously. As much of the commentary has said, most of what he's saying right now is symbolic at best. There's no real action following from it. Any action he might take requires Congress and so on and so forth. And most importantly, because the United States is only one party to an Iran deal, and the other members have already made it clear that they are not going to go along with the United States decertification of the deal. I think one of the implications of this is to ask whether this might substantially undermine the United States' ability to marshal its allies to support some of its most reckless military and diplomatic adventures.
Right. Professor, I'm glad you brought that up because the German foreign minister, Sigmar Gabriel, has already said that if Trump pulls away from this deal, that it would push the EU allies to have closer relations with China and Russia. Do you think the president has really thought about the inverse reactions to this?
Well, you know, I think if we listen to the talking heads, I think that they're right about one thing, which is there's no way to know how much Trump has thought about any subject. There's definitely been proven that he hasn't thought at all about some of the things he says. So I doubt that we know much about what he's thought about. I think what's more important is to ask the group around him, ask the question about how much the group around him has thought about this. And I, for one, don't know. I mean, I think that the sign that maybe this is all just a more blowing steam might be the fact that he put in actually explicit caveats about not really tearing up the agreement, not really taking any reckless moves, punting it to Congress suggests that maybe they decided, well, let's let him blow off some steam, you know. That the what did Senator Corker call it? That the personnel in the adult child care center are actually in control. It's conceivable that that's the case, but of course he is the president, and he could do a lot of things, even that they didn't want him to do, that could move us in a direction of confrontation.
Now, speaking of confrontation, obviously the hot topic right now is still North Korea. How do you respond to President Trump's suggestion that Iran is in support of North Korea's nuclear weapons program?
I think that's an example of probably the adults in the child care center were unable to get to him before he said that. That sounds like some kind of fantasy of his. I was listening today to an interview with Robert Lindner and the famous psychiatrist, and he was saying that Trump has a particular pathology that results in him saying things that occur to him without ever asking himself whether there might be any reality check on that. And that does sound like it because it's the kind of thing of saying, you know, he needs for the world to be divided into these two pieces, right, with all the bad people on one side, and then he can attack them all at once.
And the U.S. on the other, it appears, right?
Alone pretty soon.
All right, and we got to leave that right there, Professor. Thank you so much. Michael Schwartz, Emeritus Distinguished Professor of Sociology at Stony Brook State University. Thank you for sharing your insight with us today.
And thank you for having me.
He's often threatened to tear up the landmark deal with Iran, but in the end, U.S. President Donald Trump stopped short of pulling out of the 2015 agreement to limit its nuclear program, for now. And even though his own administration has twice certified that Iran is complying with the deal, he now says he won't do it again.
I am announcing today that we cannot and will not make this certification. We will not continue down a path whose predictable conclusion is more violence, more terror, and the very real threat of Iran's nuclear breakout. That is why I am directing my administration to work closely with Congress.
For months, Trump has accused his predecessor, Barack Obama, of being myopic in negotiations with Iran, focusing only on Iran's nuclear program, but not the financing of groups Trump says are causing instability in the region. The president has directed the U.S. Congress to potentially revamp U.S. law to set up tough new standards. If Iran violates arbitrary trigger points, lifted sanctions could be put back in place. Senate Republicans are already drafting legislation supported by top Democrats who have always viewed the 2015 deal as somewhat imperfect.
We're saying if they're not in compliance, we're all together on this. We're out.
The administration also has its sights on another Iranian target, the country's Revolutionary Guard. New U.S. Treasury sanctions are being imposed, which Donald Trump says are long overdue. Critics say these actions put international relations at risk and could spell the end of the deal painstakingly negotiated over more than a decade.
This deal was working. It was delivering. The Iranians were living up to it. The IAEA certified 8 times that Iran was adhering to the deal. Trump took a perfectly working deal and transformed it into a crisis with the decision that he made today.
Donald Trump has shifted U.S.-Iran policy, and he's not entirely ruling out withdrawing from the agreement altogether.
I may do that. The deal is terrible.
Tough, robust speech with some very, very harsh rhetoric for Iran. A very, very different tone completely from President Obama's, softly appeasement approach towards Iran. This was a very, very strong statement from the president today. And decertification, I think, is a very important first step in terms of dealing with the huge, overwhelming threat that the Middle East faces from Iran, that the West faces in general, and also, of course, the United States. And so I think he sent, definitely the right message to a hostile regime. And decertification, in my view, potentially is the first step along the path to the United States altogether withdrawing from the deal, actually. Because after all, if indeed Congress moves forward with reimposing US sanctions against Iran effectively, the United States would no longer be party to this agreement. So this is a very, very big move by the president today, and the Iran nuclear deal, without a doubt, is a very bad, reckless deal signed by President Obama without any support at the time from the United States Congress, without the support of the American people. A very bad agreement, I think, for U.S. interests.
Now, having said that, it was a deal signed in partnership with the European allies. I think the European Union out with a statement saying that President Trump, no one person, in fact, could unilaterally unravel this deal. Where do we stand with respect to them? Theresa May earlier this week pointing a statement directly at President Trump saying that they think Iran is living within the rules and spirit of this deal.
Yeah, certainly there's very strong opposition to U.S. decertification and indeed to any U.S. withdrawal from the deal. The strongest opposition in Europe is coming from the European Commission at the heart of the European Union, and also from France and Germany. And I think for the EU, there are a number of factors here. I think, national security isn't exactly top of the list for the European Union. The EU cares above all, I think, about the huge financial interest at stake for many European countries. And if you look at the large amount of deals being conducted between French and German companies, Italian companies, for example, with the regime in Tehran, there's a lot of money to lose here. After all, a company like Total, France's biggest oil company, is now working through a $5 billion deal with Iran, actually, to exploit gas fields. So there's a lot of money at stake here. But, President Trump has to do what is in the U.S. strategic interest. What Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron think of the deal or what the United States does should be irrelevant. What is paramount here is the U.S. national interest. And I think that President Trump certainly is acting in the U.S. national interest today.
I'll stay right there because I want to bring in our panel, Hudson Institute fellow Michael Pregent, a former military intelligence officer who advised General David Petraeus and served on the H.R. McMaster before he was named National Security Advisor, and Rebecca Grant, a former Secretary of the Air Force official and current IRIS independent research president. Rebecca, I'll start with you. Okay, so now this lands in the lap of Congress. Not a lot of folks these days have confidence that Congress can get anything done, even something like this. So how do you game this out for us? How do you see it playing out?
Well, Trump has taken a really good approach here. One, Congress was briefed, top officials were briefed over the last couple of days. But Charles, keep in mind there's a hugely important background here for Congress to consider too. Trump is seeing intelligence every day on the mischief that Iran is making in the battlefield in Syria and Iraq. Don't forget, our forces had to shoot down 2 Iranian-made drones back in June because they were threatening our coalition forces. So Congress has to consider this too. What is the role of Iran in the post-combat aftermath in Iraq and Syria? So Trump has made a brilliant move here to get some more maneuvering room to look not only at the nuclear deal, but at how we go forward with regional stability. And don't forget, this deal only said it takes Iran from going from being 2 to 3 months away from a bomb to only a year away from a bomb. That was the maximum claim made. Very flimsy deal.
Yeah, in fact, many people say what everyone agrees on is it put them on an official path to the bomb. Michael, how do you see this playing out? Because it's unlikely that Iran would okay any sort of major significant changes to the deal, particularly when they've got the EU behind them and perhaps even feckless members of our own Congress.
Well, two things happened today. Secretary Mnuchin warned European and U.S. companies that doing business with companies in Iran that are tied to the Revolutionary Guard Corps could result in U.S. Treasury targeting those entities, both European, American, and Iranian companies with sanctions. That's one thing. The way I see this playing out, the president basically said, you got 3 months to do something about this, and if you don't, we're going to kill the deal. One of the interesting things here is we can actually work with our allies and present Iran a deal without them having a say, basically not having Zarif at the table to ask us to make concessions, and basically delivering the Iran deal to Iran, saying these are the negotiations. We want access to these sites, no ballistic missiles, and we're going to continue to put sanctions on the Revolutionary Guard Corps.
What about their spread of terror in the region? To Rebecca's point, at Yemen to it and other things. This is part of their core goals. So it's hard to imagine them giving that up.
Well, they're going to have to, because the entirety of the IRGC was designated today. That's huge. That's ramifications for any country that has an IRGC proxy or IRGC-backed militia in their country. They have to actually purge them from their security forces. I'm talking about Iraq, I'm talking about Syria, I'm talking about Beirut, and I'm talking about Yemen. There are a lot of these entities that can be targeted now. The Revolutionary Guard Corps designation today is actually bigger than decertification.
Yeah.
Because the IRGC actually runs their ballistic missile program. The IRGC does a lot of the testing. So this is a big day. And this is the first time the government's ever designated a country's military as a terrorist organization.
That was really the headline here, wasn't it, Niall? Going directly after the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, President Trump took a firm stance against them.
Well, this sends exactly the right message, and the Revolutionary Guard's activities run through every aspect, actually, of the Iranian government. They are at the very heart of the regime, and also by targeting the Revolutionary Guards, you also will target and hit the Iranian economy and a large number of international companies and so on that do business with Iran. So the tentacles of the Revolutionary Guard spread throughout the Iranian regime. So President Trump and his administration was absolutely right to target them today. This is a very important first step.